All right, so we saw in the last video that basically a more radical element was starting to take over the French Revolution, or at least trying to, with the March of the Fisherwomen, forcing the king and queen to move back to Paris. Well, the National Assembly continues to do its job. Eventually, it passes something called the Civil Constitution of the Clergy, and it had two parts to it. One part was that the clergy were now declared government employees and had to swear allegiance to France. This was probably the first big mistake of the National Assembly, because many of the priests refused to take this oath of allegiance to France because they swear allegiance to the church first. And the priests that didn't take the oath were now illegal. And this angered many people, particularly in the French countryside, who were still very conservative when it came to religion. And it's going to cause a split within the revolution itself. This was not an extremely popular idea among everyone in France. Also, it gave the government control of church property, which they then began to sell to try to help with the financial crisis. Also did not go over well, as you can imagine, with certain members of the church and also certain members of the French populace. Eventually, they do finally create a constitution of 1791. Now, this constitution turns France to a constitutional monarchy. The National Assembly is ended and replaced with a legislative assembly. It's like Congress. But another mistake to go along with the church thing is this constitution gave limited voting rights. It did not allow women to vote at all, which angered a lot of the women. Women helped storm Bastille. Women stormed the Palace of Versailles, the March of the Fisherwomen. Women had played a large role in the revolution, and they're denied the right to vote, so they're not happy about that. Also, whether or not you voted was based on how much taxes you paid. So the poor still could not vote. And it was many of the poor who stormed the Bastille and marched the fisherwomen. And they are upset that they probably should have went with universal male suffrage, which you'll learn about that in just a second, but they did not. They limited the voting rights. So the new government is not terribly popular. It's not radical enough for some. It did not reform enough for some. It's too radical for others. It's made conservatives throughout France upset. It's a very unpopular government, and then Louis doesn't help because Louis and the royal family, they try to run away not long after the Constitution is created and signed. Their plan was to get to Austria, where Marie Antoinette was from, where the Queen was from, and then possibly use the Austrian army to invade France to crush the revolution. So they've got to get from Paris to Austria, and they make it as far as Verrines, which is circled on the screen there, which is pretty close to the Austrian border. But at Verrines, late at night, early in the morning, the king and the royal family is spotted. Their disguises are seen through their false IDs to not fool the guards at Verrines. Louis is basically arrested and is brought back to Paris. And this just fuels the fire of the radical revolutionaries who now can say, see, we told you you can't trust this new government. Our own king has betrayed us, right? And was heading to Austria possibly to raise an army against us. Something has to be done. Well, something was done. In April 1792, France declares war on Austria, which seems like a really stupid thing to do, being that they're in the middle of all this change and they're still in a financial crisis. But in part, it was because Austria was already threatening France, because the French government had Louis and Marie Antoinette basically under house arrest. Marie Antoinette, of course, is related to the royal family of Austria. So war is declared on Austria, and the war goes very poorly at first. Most of the commanding officers within the French army were nobility. Well, many of the nobility at this point had fled France. They fled not long after the storming of the Bastille. They just fled, taking their leadership with them. So the French army has a lot of enthusiasm, but the leadership lacks experience. They oftentimes lack supplies because of the financial crisis. The war begins to go very poorly. There's still continued bread shortages. There's still a financial crisis to deal with. The Constitution, the new one, 1791, is not terribly popular. And there is a growing radical element inside the city of Paris, the capital, called the Paris Commune. And members of the Paris Commune were also called sans culottes. Culottes were the knee-length pants that the upper class and the upper middle class, the bourgeoisie wore, right? And the sans culottes were without the culottes, sans culottes. They wore the long pants of the working class. That's why they were called the sans culottes. You could also spot them by their red hat, which also had a tricolore flag of the French Revolution pinned to it. And these, by and large, were your more radical revolutionaries. They did not like the new Constitution of 1791. They did not like the limited voting rights. They oftentimes wanted an end to the monarchy. They're unhappy that they still don't have bread. They're unhappy that they still can't vote. They're unhappy that there's still a financial crisis. They're just really angry and unhappy, and eventually that anger and unhappiness leads them to storm the National Assembly, telling its members that the National Assembly is now over and it will be replaced by a National Convention, and that will be based on universal male suffrage. That means all men will have the right to vote, regardless of wealth, income, taxes, owner property. Just all French men will be able to vote for members of this National Convention. That the new government from now on, going forward, will be based on universal male suffrage. This National Convention, once the members are elected, abolished the French monarchy and turned France into a republic. So now they have to decide what to do with their former king who attempted to run away to Austria, possibly to raise a foreign army to invade France to crush the revolution. So in review, when all this started, France had a monarchy with 3 estates. Then it had a monarchy and a national assembly. Then it had a monarchy with a constitution and a legislative assembly. Now it has a national convention and no monarchy, and it is a republic.